Okay, today we'll be reading the second part of chapter 1. Yesterday we read the first part and we met Beezus and her little sister Ramona, who was a bit of a troublemaker and caused a lot of problems for her sister. And at the end of what we read yesterday, Beezus was getting ready to take Ramona to the library to find a new book, and Ramona came out dressed as the Easter Bunny. "Mother," wailed Beezus, "you aren't going to let her wear those awful ears to the library." "Well, I don't see why not." Mother sounded surprised that Beezus should object to Ramona's ears. "They look so silly. Whoever heard of an Easter Bunny in September?" Beezus complained, as Ramona hopped up and down to make her ears flap. "I just hope we don't meet anyone we know," Beezus thought as they started out the front door. But the girls had no sooner left the house when they saw Mrs. Weiser, a lady who lived in the next block, coming toward them with a friend. It was too late to turn back. Mrs. Weiser had seen them and was waving. "Why, hello there, Beatrice," Mrs. Weiser said when they met. "I see you have a dear little bunny with you today." Yes." Beezus didn't know what else to say. Ramona obligingly hopped up and down to make her ears flop. Mrs. Weiser said to her friend, as if Beezus and Ramona couldn't hear, "Isn't she adorable?" Both children knew whom Mrs. Weiser was talking about. If she had been talking about Beezus, she would have said something quite different. Such a nice girl, probably. A sweet child. Adorable? Never. "Just look at those eyes," said Mrs. Weiser. Ramona beamed. She knew whose eyes they were talking about. Beezus knew too, but she didn't care. Mother said blue eyes were just as pretty as brown. Mrs. Weiser leaned over to Ramona. "What color are your eyes, sweetheart?" she asked. "Brown and white," said Ramona promptly. "Brown and white eyes," exclaimed the friend. "Isn't that cunning?" Beezus had thought it was cunning the first time she heard Ramona say it, about a year ago. Since then, she had given up trying to explain to Ramona that she wasn't supposed to say that she had brown and white eyes, because Ramona always answered, "My eyes are brown and white." And Beezus had to admit that in a way they were. "And what is the little bunny's name?" asked Mrs. Weiser's friend. "My name is Ramona Geraldine Quimby," answered Ramona, and then added generously, "My sister's name is Beezus." "Beezus!" exclaimed the lady. "What an odd name. Is it French?" "Oh, no," said Beezus, wishing, as she so often did, that she had a more common nickname, like Betty or Patsy. She explained as quickly as she could how she happened to be called Beezus. Ramona did not like to lose the attention of her audience. She hitched up the legs of her overalls and raised her knee. "See my scab?" she said proudly. "I fell down and hurt my knee, and it bled and bled." "Ramona!" Beezus was horrified. "You aren't supposed to show people your scabs." "Why?" asked Ramona. That was one of the most exasperating things about Ramona. She never seemed to understand what she was not supposed to do. "It's a very nice scab," said Mrs. Weiser's friend, but she did not look as if she really thought it was nice. "Well, we must be going," said Mrs. Weiser. "Goodbye, Mrs. Weiser," said Beezus politely, and hoped that if they met anyone else they knew, she could somehow manage to hide Ramona behind a bush. "Bye-bye, Ramona," said Mrs. Weiser. "Goodbye," said Ramona, and Beezus knew that she felt that a girl who was 4 years old was too grown up to say bye-bye. Except for holding Ramona's hand crossing streets, Beezus lingered behind her the rest of the way to the library. She hoped that all the people who stopped and smiled at Ramona would not think they were together. When they reached the Glenwood Branch Library, she said, "Ramona, wouldn't you like me to carry your ears for you now?" "No," said Ramona flatly. Inside the library, Beezus hurried Ramona into the boys and girls section and seated her on a little chair in front of the picture books. "See, Ramona," she whispered, "here's a book about a duck. Wouldn't you like that?" "No," said Ramona in a loud voice. Beezus's face turned red with embarrassment when everyone in the library looked at Ramona's ears and smiled. "Shh," she whispered as Mrs. Griever, the grown-ups librarian, frowned in their direction. "You're supposed to speak quietly in the library." Beezus selected another book. "Look, Ramona, here's a funny story about a kitten that falls into the goldfish bowl. Wouldn't you like that?" "No," said Ramona in a loud whisper. I want to find my own book. If only Miss Evans, the children's librarian, were there. She knew how to select a book for Ramona. She would know how to select a book for Ramona. Beezus noticed Miss Griever glance disapprovingly in the direction, while the other grown-ups watched Ramona and smiled. All right, you can look, Beezus agreed to keep Ramona quiet. I'll go find a book for myself. When Beezus had selected her book, she returned to the picture book section, where she found Ramona sitting on the bench with both arms clasped around a big fat book. I found my book, she said, and held it up for Beezus to see. On the cover was a picture of a steam shovel with its jaws full of rocks. The title was Big Steve the Steam Shovel. Oh, Ramona, whispered Beezus in dismay. You don't want that book. I do too, insisted Ramona, forgetting to whisper. You told me I could pick out my own book. Under the disapproving stare of Miss Griever, Beezus gave up. Ramona was right. Beezus looked with distaste at the big orange-colored book in its stout library binding. At least it would be due in 2 weeks, but Beezus did not feel very happy at the thought of 2 more weeks of steam shovels, and it just went to show how Ramona always got her own way. Beezus took her book and Ramona's to Mrs. Griever's desk. Is this where you pay for the books? Asked Ramona. We don't have to pay for the books, said Beezus. Are you going to charge them? Ramona asked. Beezus pulled a library card out of her sweater pocket. I show this card to the lady and she lets us keep the books for 2 weeks. A library isn't like a store where you buy things. Ramona looked as if she did not understand. I want a card, she said. You have to be able to write your name before you can have a library card, Beezus explained. I can write my name, said Ramona. Oh, Ramona, said Beezus, you can't either. Perhaps she really does know how to write her name, said Miss Griever, as she took a card out of her desk. Beezus watched doubtfully, while Miss Griever asked Ramona her name and age. Then the librarian asked Ramona what her father's occupation was. An occupation, in case you don't know, an occupation is his job. When Ramona didn't understand, she asked, What kind of work does your father do? He mows the lawn, said Ramona promptly. The librarian laughed. I mean, how does he earn his living? Somehow, Beezus did not like to have Miss Griever laugh at her little sister. After all, how could Ramona be expected to know what father did? He works for the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, Beezus told the librarian. Miss Griever wrote this down on the card and shoved it across the desk to Ramona. Write your name on this line, she directed. Nothing daunted, Ramona grasped the pencil in her fist and began to write. She bore down so hard that she tipped the snap off the lead, but she wrote on. When she laid down the pencil, Beezus picked up the card to see what she had written. The line on the card was filled with, and you could see what she wrote here. That's my name, said Ramona proudly. That's just scribbling, Beezus told her. It is too my name, insisted Ramona, while Miss Griever quietly dropped the card into the wastebasket. I've watched you write, and I know how. Here, Ramona, you could hold my card, Beezus tried to be comforting. You could pretend it's yours. Ramona brightened at this, and Mrs. Griever checked out the books on Beezus's card. As soon as they got home, Ramona demanded, Read my new book to me. And so Beezus began. Big Steve was a steam shovel. He was the biggest steam shovel in the whole city. When she finished the book, she had to admit she liked Big Steve better than Scoopy. His only sound effects were tooting and growling. He tooted and growled in big letters on every page. Big Steve did not shed tears or want to be a pile driver. He worked hard at being a steam shovel, and by the end of the book, Beezus had learned a lot about steam shovels. Unfortunately, she did not want to learn about steam shovels. Oh well, she guessed she could stand 2 weeks of Big Steve. Read it again, said Ramona enthusiastically. I like Big Steve. He's better than Scoopy. How would you like me to show you how to really write your name? Beezus asked, hoping to divert Ramona from steam shovels. Okay, divert means like to change your ways. Okay, agreed Ramona. Beezus found pencil and paper and wrote Ramona in large, careful letters across the top of the paper. Ramona studied it critically. I don't like it, she said at last. But that's the way your name is spelled, Beezus explained. You didn't make dots and lines, said Ramona. Seizing the pencil, she wrote. But Ramona, you don't understand. Beezus took the pencil and wrote her own name on the paper. You've seen me write Beatrice, which has an I and a T in it. See, like that. You don't have an I and T in your name because it isn't spelt that way. Ramona looked skeptical. She grabbed the pencil again and wrote it with flourish. That's my name because I like it, she announced. I like to make dots and lines. Lying flat on her stomach on the floor, she proceeded to fill the paper with I's and T's. But Ramona, nobody's name is spelt with just Beezus stopped. What was the use? Trying to explain spelling and writing to Ramona was too complicated. Everything became difficult when Ramona was around, even an easy thing like taking a book out of the library. Well, if Ramona was happy thinking her name was spelled with I's and T's, she could go ahead and think it. The next 2 weeks were fairly peaceful. Mother and father soon tired of tooting and growling, and like Beezus, they looked forward to the day Big Steve was due at the library. Father even tried to hide the book behind the radio, but Ramona soon found it. Beezus was happy that one part of her plan had worked. Ramona had forgotten the little steam shovel, now that she had a better book. On Ramona's second trip to the library, perhaps Miss Evans could find a book that would make her forget steam shovels entirely. As for Ramona, she was perfectly happy. She had 3 people to read aloud a book she liked, and she spent much of her time covering sheets of paper with I's and T's. Sometimes she wrote in pencil, sometimes she wrote in crayon, and once she wrote in ink until her mother caught her at it. Finally, to the relief of the rest of the family, the day came when Big Steve had to be returned. Come on, Ramona, said Beezus. It is time to go to the library for another book. I have a book, said Ramona, who was lying on her stomach writing her version of her name on a piece of paper with purple crayon. No, it belongs to the library, Beezus explained, glad that for once Ramona couldn't possibly get her own way. It's my book, said Ramona, crossing several T's with a flourish. Beezus is right, dear, observed Mother. Run along and get Big Steve. Ramona looked sulky, but she went into the bedroom. In a few minutes, she appeared with Big Steve in her hand and a satisfied expression on her face. It's my book, she announced. I wrote my name in it. Mother looked alarmed. What do you mean, Ramona? Let me see. She took the book and opened it. Every page in the book was covered with enormous purple I's and T's in Ramona's very best handwriting. Mother, cried Beezus, look what she's done, and in crayon so it won't erase. Ramona Quimby, said Mother, you're a very naughty girl. Why did you do a thing like that? It's my book, said Ramona stubbornly. I like it. Mother, what am I going to do? Beezus demanded. It's checked out on my card, and I'm responsible. They won't let me take any more books out of the library, and I won't have anything to read, and it'll be all Ramona's fault. She was always spoiling my fun, and it isn't fair. Beezus didn't know what she would do without her library card. She couldn't get along with library books. She just couldn't, that was all. I do not spoil your fun, stormed Ramona. You have all the fun. I can't read, and it isn't fair. Ramona's words ended in a howl as she buried her face in her mother's skirt. I couldn't read when I was your age, and I didn't have someone read to me all the time, so it is too fair, argued Beezus. You always get your own way because you're the youngest. I do not, shouted Ramona, and you don't read all the time. You're mean. I am not mean, Beezus shouted back. Children, cried Mother, stop it, both of you. Ramona, you're a very naughty girl. A loud sniff came from Ramona and Beezus. Her mother continued, the library won't take your card away from you. If you get my purse, I'll give you some money to pay for the damage to the book. Take Ramona along with you, explain what happened, and the librarian will tell you how much to pay. This made Beezus feel better. Ramona sulked all the way to the library, but when they got there, Beezus was pleased to see that Miss Evans, the children's librarian, was sitting behind the desk. Miss Evans was the kind of librarian who would understand about little sisters. Hello, Beatrice, said Miss Evans. Is this your little sister I've heard so much about? Beezus wondered what Miss Evans had heard about Ramona. Yes, this was Ramona, she said, and went on hesitantly. And Miss Evans, I'm a bad girl, interrupted Ramona, smiling winningly at the librarian. Oh, you are, said Miss Evans. What did you do? I wrote in a book, said Ramona, not the least ashamed. I wrote in purple crayon it will never, ever erase. Never, never, never. Embarrassed, Beezus handed Miss Evans Big Steve the steam shovel. Mom gave me money to pay for the damage, she explained. The librarian turned the pages of the book. Well, you didn't miss a page, did you? She finally said to Ramona. No, said Ramona, pleased with herself, and it will never. I'm awfully sorry, interrupted Beezus. After this, I'll try to keep our library books where she can't reach them. Miss Evans consulted a file of little cards in a drawer. Since every page in the book was damaged and the library could no longer use it, I'll have to ask you to pay for the whole book. I'm sorry, but this is the rule. It'll cost $2.50. $2.50. What a lot of things that would have bought, Beezus reflected, as she pulled 3 folded dollar bills out of her pocket and handed them to the librarian. Miss Evans put the money in the drawer and gave Beezus 50 cents in change. Then Miss Evans took a rubber stamp and stamped something inside the book. By twisting her head around, Beezus could see that the word was discarded. There, Miss Evans said, pushing the book across the desk. You have paid for it, so now it's yours. Beezus stared at the librarian. You mean to keep? That's right, answered Miss Evans. Ramona grabbed the book. It's mine. I told you it was mine. Then she turned to Beezus and said triumphantly, You said people don't buy books at the library, and now you just bought one. Buying a book and paying for damage are not the same things, Miss Evans pointed out to Ramona. Beezus could see that Ramona didn't care. The book was hers, wasn't it? It was paid for and she could keep it, and that's not fair, thought Beezus. Ramona shouldn't get her own way when she had been naughty. But Miss Evans, protested Beezus, if she spoils a book, she shouldn't get to keep it. Now every time she finds a book she likes, she will. Beezus did not go on. She knew very well what Ramona would do, but she wasn't going to say it out loud in front of her. I see what you mean, Miss Evans looked thoughtful. Give me the book, Ramona, she said. Doubtfully, Ramona handed her the book. Ramona, do you have a library card? Miss Evans asked. Ramona shook her head. Then Beezus must have taken the book out on her card, said Miss Evans, so the book belongs to Beezus. Why, of course. Why hadn't she thought of that before? It was her book, not Ramona's. Oh, thank you, said Beezus gratefully as Miss Evans handed the book to her. She could do anything she wanted with it. For once, Ramona didn't know what to say. She scowled and looked as if she were building up to a tantrum. You've got to read it to me, she said at last. Not unless I feel like it, said Beezus. After all, it's my book, she couldn't resist adding. That's no fair, Ramona looked as if she were about to howl. It's too fair, said Beezus calmly. And if you have a tantrum, I won't read to you at all. Suddenly, if she decided Beezus meant what she said, Ramona stopped scowling. Okay, she said cheerfully. Beezus watched her carefully for a minute. Yes, she really was being agreeable, thought Beezus with a great feeling of relief. And now that she did not have to read Big Steve unless she wanted to, Beezus felt she would not mind reading it once in a while. Come on, Ramona, she said. Maybe I'll have time to read you before Father comes home. Okay, said Ramona happily as she took Beezus' hand. Miss Evans smiled at the girls as they started to leave. Good luck, Beatrice, she said. Okay, so a lot happened there with that library book. You have some questions to answer, and make sure you look back if you are not sure of an answer.